Rainbow Dash spent most of her flight with Spitfire silent, thinking about Soren. The flight was relatively uneventful, with the occasional group of undead here and there. Rainbow Dash had never been to this part of Equestria before. It was mostly countryside, with no settlements or life in it. The farther they went out, the more rare the undead became. "This place looks safe. Why don't you just build a settlement here?" inquired Rainbow Dash. "It's too close to cities. The dead don't just build up in towns. When cities become dangerous, survivors hiding them will flee. Now, as you should know by now, these things really enjoy eating survivors. Therefore, the undead will pursue runaways. Eventually, the cities will become safe, and the rural countryside that you'd expect to be uninhabited will be overrun by them. There will have been places in the middle of nowhere that were worse than Ponyville we just left was," answered Spitfire. "Tell me more of the quarantine zones." "Well, there are several settlements built all around Equestria that are made for taking the infected and locking them away from the rest of the world. This was designed to prevent the spread of a new plague, but, as you can see, it failed. Now, royal guards from Canterlot move around clearing out these quarantines of the infected, and now survivors are using them as shelter. But, as I said earlier, the dead follow the living, and now the vast majority of these zones are under large-scale attack. The one we're going to is the closest. Most ponies who heard these quarantines tried to make a break for one. Some failed, some succeeded. Now, I'll warn you, our zone is barely surviving. I don't doubt that in the next 3 days, it will probably fall to the dead." "That's what you and Soren were talking about when I was tied down," Dash realized. Spitfire remained silent. It was an hour before morning when the two arrived in the quarantine zone. Spitfire was right about large-scale attacks. This outpost was surrounded completely by an enormous mob of rotting meat, banging uselessly on the stone walls of the quarantine. Canterlot guards roamed the rooftops, ready to act at the first sign of being overrun. Rainbow Dash and Spitfire flew into the safety zone on the inner walls. Spitfire gave Dash a quick tour, showing her the supply room, the infirmary, the sleeping quarters, and the cafeteria. "Any idea where I can find my friend?" asked Rainbow Dash. "What does she spend most of her free time doing?" "Reading. She's an egghead." "Check the supply room. We keep books there." Rainbow Dash nodded her thanks, and checked out the supply storage room, which was an old warehouse with a scrap metal roof, which threatened to blow away in the wind at any moment. Rainbow Dash slowly opened the large metal door and peeked inside. There were stacks of food, clothes, weapons, ammo, and books, but no Twilight. Dash thoroughly searched the rest of the compound, but to no avail. She cursed at her coming all this way for nothing, at her close friends being missing in the beginning of the apocalypse, and pretty much everything else that happened since the storm clouds moved in. It hadn't rained since Rainbow Dash first found Applejack, thankfully. If she and her group were caught outside in a storm, they'd freeze to death in hours. Rainbow Dash would not give up the search for her friends, even though she had no idea where to look next. Rainbow Dash was about to decide upon returning to Ponyville and seeing if there was somewhere she overlooked when an idea struck her. What if Twilight went to Canterlot to meet up with Princess Celestia? Rainbow Dash asked one of the guards to notify Spitfire that Dash was leaving. He nodded and grunted as Rainbow Dash took off for Canterlot. It took some time to get there, and Rainbow Dash really wished she had brought some food from the quarantine zone, but it didn't matter. She had arrived in Canterlot, which was amazingly unscathed by the evil that surrounds it. Dash tried to fly in, but found that there was a force field. It does explain how the city is overrun, thought Rainbow Dash. She floated down to the train tunnel and saw 2 guards on either side. She managed to get their attention, and once the guards were convinced Dash was infected, they let her in. Dash felt so much safer the second she was inside the force field. "Are the princesses here?" asked Dash. Why do you want to know? Asked the guard cautiously. He was grayish-brown with a golden helmet and spear, and his cutie mark was 2 spears crossed over a golden shield. He spoke with a rough, gravelly voice. I'm looking for a friend of mine, answered Dash. I'm sorry, but I can't give out the information you seek, said a voice from behind. Rainbow Dash turned to see the captain of a royal guard. Everything about her had an air of authority. Who is it you are searching for? Twilight Sparkle. Twilight? The princess's top student? All right. I'll allow you to speak to Celestia. The captain strode quickly towards the castle. Rainbow Dash, usually the fastest, could hardly keep up with his pony. She was being respectful and sticking to the ground, and trying to trot. When the two arrived at the castle gate, 2 guards pulled open the doors and let them inside. They'll be in the astronomy tower. You should know the way, said the captain. Rainbow Dash nodded and headed to the astronomy tower.